The cool autumn wind blew between the mirrored skyscrapers of New York City's financial district, carrying dry leaves that danced in the air before landing on the asphalt. Richard Montgomery adjusted his Italian silk tie, checked his Patek Philippe watch one more time, a gift he had given himself after closing his first billion-dollar deal, and quickened his pace toward the headquarters of his real estate empire. The meeting with Chinese investors would begin in exactly 45 minutes, and he, as always, planned to arrive half an hour early to review every detail of the presentation. Obsessive punctuality and perfectionism were trademarks that had taken him to the top of the American real estate market. As he walked along Wall Street, his territory par excellence, Richard systematically ignored the admiring glances from passers-by who recognized him from business magazine covers and television programs. At 52, he was the personification of success. Strategically trimmed gray hair, a physique maintained by daily personal trainer sessions, and a wardrobe that would cost the equivalent of several middle-class apartments. It was then that a hoarse feminine voice cut through his bubble of self-sufficiency. "Sir, can you help me with something?" Richard didn't even slow his pace, as he did hundreds of times when approached by beggars. But the next sentence hit him like lightning. "Sir, my mother has a ring just like yours." His feet stopped instantly, as if they had taken root in the concrete sidewalk. The blood drained from his face, and an icy sensation ran down his spine. Slowly, almost against his will, his eyes turned to the woman. She didn't look like the usual homeless people in the area. There was a dignity in her eyes that contrasted with her worn clothes. Her dark hair, though unkempt, framed a face that retained traces of beauty that time and hardship had not completely erased. Richard unconsciously touched the ring on his right hand, a unique piece of white gold with a peculiar design of two intertwined serpents guarding a rare blue diamond between their heads. That jewel was more than a status symbol. It was the materialization of his legitimacy as the heir of one of New York's most traditional families. "You must be mistaken," he replied with studied coldness, but his voice betrayed a slight hesitation. "This ring is one of a kind, a family heirloom." The woman smiled in a way that deeply disturbed him. It wasn't a smile of supplication or of someone trying to deceive. It was the smile of someone who finally finds something they've been looking for a long time. "I'm not mistaken, Mr. Richard Montgomery," she pronounced his name with disconcerting familiarity. "My mother worked at the Montgomery Mansion almost 30 years ago. She has many stories to tell about that time and about that ring." Datis businessman felt his smartphone vibrate in his suit pocket. Probably his assistant, reminding him of the meeting with the investors. But for the first time in decades, Richard Montgomery was completely oblivious to his professional commitments. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice now just a whisper. "My name is Helen," she answered, maintaining that enigmatic smile. "And I believe we have a lot to talk about regarding the past, about your family, and about mine." The autumn wind blew stronger, raising more dry leaves around them. Richard observed a group of executives approaching on the sidewalk, recognized some faces from the financial market. His self-preservation instinct took control. "Now is not a good time," he said quickly, pulling out his wallet and removing some papers. "Here's my card. Call me tomorrow. We'll arrange a more appropriate meeting." Helen took the card delicately, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't worry, Mr. Montgomery. I've waited years for this moment. I can wait one more day." Richard hurried away, feeling Helen's gaze burning into his back. His heart was beating erratically, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he had sworn never to experience again: fear. As he entered the mirrored lobby of his commercial building, Richard saw his reflection multiplied infinitely. In each one, the ring on his right hand seemed to pulse like a silent accusation. He knew that encounter on the sidewalk was just the beginning of something that could destroy everything he had built over decades. The meeting with the Chinese investors was a disaster. For the first time in his career, Richard Montgomery was distracted, his mind constantly wandering to the disturbing encounter that morning. When he finally arrived at his triplex penthouse, on the Upper West Side, it was past 9 in the evening. Beverly, his wife of 25 years, was sitting on the terrace with a glass of wine, admiring the privileged view of the city. She was the epitome of the New York socialite, elegant, discreet, and perfectly aware of her role as the wife of one of the most powerful men in the city. "You look pale," she commented bluntly, her astute eyes studying her husband. "What happened at the meeting?" Richard poured himself a generous dose of single malt whiskey before answering. "Nothing important. The Chinese are being tougher in negotiations than we expected." Beverly placed her wineglass on the Italian marble table. After so many years of marriage, she had developed a sixth sense for her husband's lies. "Richard, you were never good at lying to..." "Sammy, what's really going on?" He loosened his tie and sat heavily in one of the exclusive designer lounges. The ring on his right hand caught a reflection of the ambient lighting, and for a moment, the intertwined serpents seemed to come to life. "Remember when we met?" he asked abruptly. "At the debutante ball at the Metropolitan Club?" Beverly smiled at the memory. "How could I forget? You were the young prodigy of the real estate market, freshly graduated and already multiplying the family fortune. All the debutantes wanted to dance with you. And you were the only one who didn't seem impressed," he completed, a rare nostalgic smile softening his features. "Because I saw beyond the facade," she answered, getting up to approach her husband. "Just as I see now that something is very wrong. What are you trying to tell me, Richard?" Before he could answer, his cell phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Montgomery, this is Helen. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at Forest E. Cafe on Madison Avenue. Come alone. My mother has much to tell you about the true meaning of that ring you carry." Beverly, who had read the message over her husband's shoulder, frowned. "Who is Helen? And what's this story about the family ring?" Richard turned off his phone and put it in his pocket, avoiding his wife's inquisitive gaze. "Just another person. Trying to take advantage, dear. Nothing to worry about." But that night, as Beverly slept beside him, Richard remained awake, turning over in his mind the memories he had tried to bury for so long. The ring on his nightstand seemed to glow in the darkness of the room, like a beacon pointing to a past he thought he had left behind. The next morning, Richard cancelled all his meetings, something he had never done before. His personal assistant, Charles, who had worked with him for 15 years, was visibly concerned with the change in his boss's routine. "Are you sure you're all right, sir?" asked Charles, while organizing the day's schedule. "I've never seen you cancel appointments like this." "I'm fine," Richard answered dryly, adjusting his shirt sleeve to hide the ring. "I just need to resolve a personal matter." At 9:45, he parked his Porsche a few blocks before Forest Cafe. He didn't want to draw attention. The establishment was one of those typical old Manhattan places, with a 1950s air and a clientele that mixed artists, intellectuals, and ordinary neighborhood people. Helen was already there, sitting at a table in the back, wearing simple but clean clothes. Beside her, in a wheelchair, was an elderly woman with white hair and penetrating eyes that made Richard's blood freeze in his veins. "Hello, Richard," the lady said with a surprisingly strong voice. "Or should I say, little brother?" Richard felt his legs weaken as he sat at the table. The lady in the wheelchair, who appeared to be around 70 years old, observed him with a mixture of tenderness and melancholy that made him deeply uncomfortable. There was something familiar in her gaze, something he couldn't explain. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally managed to say, his voice betraying his insecurity. "There must be some mistake." "A mistake?" The lady smiled, taking from a worn bag an object wrapped in a piece of blue velvet. "Then tell me, how do you explain this?" With fingers trembling from age, she uncovered the object. Richard felt his heart stop for an instant. There, identical to his in every minute detail, was another ring with the same intertwined serpents and the same blue diamond. "Impossible," he murmured, instinctively touching his own ring. "This ring is one of a kind, passed down from generation to generation in the Montgomery family." "It is indeed a unique piece," the lady agreed, her eyes shining with contained tears. "So unique that your father ordered 2 exactly identical copies made. One for the family everyone knew, and another," she made a significant pause, "for the family he kept secret." Helen, who until then had been observing the scene in silence, placed a yellowed envelope on the table. Here is all the documentation, including the receipts from the jeweler who made the rings 30 years ago. Do you recognize your father's signature?" Richard opened the envelope with trembling hands. The documents were authentic, there was no doubt. The elegant handwriting of his father, August Montgomery, was there, ordering the making of 2 identical rings. The date coincided with the time when his father had supposedly restored the original family ring. "My name is Mary," the lady finally introduced herself. "I worked at the Montgomery mansion for 15 years as the housekeeper. Your father, August, and I—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "We fell in love." Richard felt his breakfast turning in his stomach. Fragments of long-repressed memories began to emerge. Whispers among the employees, exchanged glances, his mother crying, alone in her room while his father spent nights working. "Helen is my daughter," Mary continued, her voice now firmer, "and August Montgomery's daughter, your half-sister." The businessman looked at Helen, really looked for the first time. The same green eyes as his father, the same face shape, the same ironic smile he saw every morning in the mirror. How had he not noticed before? "Why now?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Why, after so long?" "Because your mother is leaving us," Helen answered softly. "The doctors say she has a few months, and before she goes, she needs to tell the whole truth, needs you to know who you really are." Mary coughed lightly, and Helen immediately turned to help her with a glass of water. The care and love between the two were palpable, making Richard feel a pang of envy he couldn't explain. "Your father loved us, Richard," Mary said after recovering. "He promised he would acknowledge everything, that he would give us the place we deserved in the family. But then—" She closed her eyes, as if the memory was too painful. "Then came that fire in the staff quarters." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The fire. He was only 17 at the time, but he remembered perfectly. The staff quarters, located at the back of the Montgomery property, had been consumed by flames during the night. Miraculously, there were no casualties, but all the families lost everything they had. "The fire wasn't accidental, was it?" he asked, fearing the answer. "Your mother found out about us," Mary answered simply. "About the ring, about Helen, about everything. She gave August an ultimatum. Either he ended everything and sent us away, or she would expose all the family's illegal business dealings to the press." The cafe around them continued its normal routine, waiters serving, customers talking, life following its course. But for Richard, the world had stopped. Every pillar that supported his reality was crumbling, one after another. "After the fire, your father came to see us one last time," Helen took over. "He left the ring with Mum, saying that one day it would prove he hadn't abandoned us by choice, that we were as much Montgomery as you." Richard looked at his own ring, that symbol of power and tradition that had always filled him with pride. Now he saw the jewel for what it really was, a silent witness to betrayal, lies, and destroyed lives. The rest of that day passed like a blur for Richard. After the meeting at the cafe, he wandered aimlessly through the streets of New York, ignoring the dozens of calls from his secretary and Beverly. His world had been turned upside down, and he needed to process everything he had discovered. When he finally arrived home, it was already night. Beverly was waiting for him in the living room, an untouched martini glass in front of her. Next to her, to Richard's surprise, was Charles, his personal assistant. "Where have you been?" Beverly asked, her voice controlled but tense. "Charles told me you cancelled all your meetings today. That has never happened before." Richard looked at Charles, who seemed uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir," the assistant explained, "but Mrs. Montgomery was very worried, and after you didn't answer any calls." "It's okay, Charles," Richard interrupted him, pouring himself a double whiskey. "In fact, it's good that you're here. I need you to start doing some discreet research for me." Beverly stood up, her heels echoing on the marble floor. "Richard, what's going on? First that strange message about the family ring, then you disappear all day." Richard twisted the ring on his finger, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. How to explain to his wife that his entire life, his entire family legacy, was based on lies? "Charles," he addressed the assistant, momentarily ignoring his wife's question, I need you to find out everything you can about the fire in the staff quarters of the Montgomery mansion 30 years ago." The assistant frowned, surprised by the request. "The fire your father never wanted to talk about?" "Exactly," Richard confirmed. "I want to know everything. News reports from the time, police records, witness statements, and also—" He hesitated for a moment. "I need you to find all the employment records of the mansion staff from that time, especially of a housekeeper named Mary." Beverly approached her husband, her astute eyes studying every detail of his expression. "Does this have something to do with that, Helen?" Richard finally met his wife's gaze. In 25 years of marriage, they had built a relationship based on convenience and mutual respect, more than on love. But there was also a deep understanding between Thomas, an ability to read between the lines. "Beverly," he said softly, "what do you know about how my father got the money to start the construction company?" The question caught his wife by surprise. Just what everyone knows, that he sold some family properties and made smart investments. "And you never wondered what properties those were, or why there are no records of them anywhere?" Charles, feeling the growing tension between the couple, began to stand up. "Perhaps I should go." "Stay," Richard ordered. "You've worked with me for 15 years, Charles. You probably know more Montgomery family secrets than my own wife." The assistant sat back down, visibly uncomfortable. Beverly took a sip of her martini, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. "Today I discovered," Richard continued, his voice trembling slightly, "that my father had another family, a woman he truly loved, and a daughter he abandoned to protect the Montgomery name, and to ensure that I would inherit everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Beverly placed her glass on the table with studied care, the only sound in the room besides the ticking of the antique clock. "And you believe this story?" she finally asked. Richard raised his right hand, showing the ring. "There's another one just like this, identical in every detail. My father had two made, one for each family." "My God," Charles murmured, momentarily forgetting his position. So the rumors were true. Both Richard and Beverly turned to the assistant. "What rumors?" they asked in unison. Charles swallowed hard, realizing he had said too much. "Well, a few years ago, when I was organizing the company's old files, I found some letters, love letters actually, addressed to a woman named Mary. But since Mr. August had already passed, and you never mentioned anything about it." Richard felt his legs weaken and let himself fall onto the sofa. "Why did you never tell me this, Charles?" "It wasn't my place, sir," the assistant answered simply. "Besides, there were other things in the letters, things about how the initial money for the construction company was really obtained, things that perhaps are better left buried." The next morning, Richard woke to the sound of rain hitting the windows of his penthouse. He had slept on the office sofa, surrounded by old family albums he had spent the entire night analyzing. Now, with different eyes, he saw details he had never noticed before. His father's distant look in family photos, the forced smiles at social events, the frequent absences on important dates. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Helen. "Mom would like to show you something. Can you come to the hospital today?" Attached was the room number where Mary was hospitalized, in a public hospital in the eastern part of the city. Before he could respond, Charles entered the office carrying an old, dusty folder. "Sir, I found something you need to see." Richard straightened up on the sofa, running his hands over his tired face. "What did you discover?" "These are records from the old staff quarters," Charles explained, opening the folder on the table. "And there's something very strange here. According to these documents, your father had started a process to grant property deeds to the longest-serving staff members, including Mary, but everything was abruptly interrupted a week before the fire." Richard took the papers with trembling hands. There was his father's signature, initiating a process that would give legal ownership of the houses to employees who had served the family for more than 10 years. It was an unusual gesture for the time, especially considering how traditional families treated their employees. "There's more," Charles continued, taking a yellowed envelope from the folder. "I found these old photos of the quarters, and look who appears in them." The photographs showed scenes of daily life in the quarters, Children playing, women hanging clothes on lines, men chatting after a day's work. In one of them, partially faded, Richard recognized his father, much younger, sitting on a wooden bench. Beside him was Mary, and on her lap, a small girl who could only be Helen. They looked happy, Richard murmured, touching the photograph with his fingertips. "Your father was different from what everyone thinks, wasn't he?" Charles commented softly. "From the records I found, he really tried to do the right thing. He wanted to acknowledge Helen, give Mary a dignified life, transform the quarters into a better place for all the staff. But my mother wouldn't allow it," Richard completed, remembering the conversation at the cafe. "She threatened to expose the family's business dealings if he went forward." At that moment, Beverly entered the office. She had exchanged her usual designer outfit for simpler clothes, and her normally impassive face showed signs of a badly slept night. "You're going to visit her in the hospital, aren't you?" she asked without preamble. Richard nodded. "I need to know the whole truth, Beverly. I need to understand who my father really was, who I really am." To his surprise, Beverly approached and took his hand in hers. "Then I'll go with you." "Are you sure?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "This may bring to light things that might be better left in the past." "Richard," she said with surprising firmness, "we've spent 25 years building a life based on appearances. Maybe it's time we find out who we really are without masks." Charles discreetly cleared his throat. "Sir, there's one more thing you need to know before you go. The Festival of Traditional Families is coming up. In 2 weeks, you'll need to present the family ring at the opening ceremony, as every year." The Festival of Traditional Families was the most important event on the New York social calendar. For a week, the city's old families celebrated their histories and traditions with a series of ceremonies and parties. The most anticipated moment was the presentation of family symbols, jewels, documents, and historical objects that represented the legacy of each clan. "How can I present this ring, knowing there's another one just like it?" Richard murmured, more to himself than to the others. "How can I get up on that stage and pretend our history is different from all the other traditional families, built on secrets and lies?" "Perhaps," Beverly suggested softly, "it's time to stop pretending." Richard looked at his wife, then at Charles, and finally at the photograph in his hands. His father was smiling in the image, a genuine smile he rarely saw in person. Beside him, Mary and little Helen formed the portrait of a family that could have been but was denied by tradition and power. "Let's go to the hospital," he decided, standing up. "But first, Charles, I need you to do one more thing." "What do you need?" "Sir, find all the former staff from the quarters, everyone who lost their homes in the fire. I want to know where they are, how they're living, and prepare compensation documents for each of them." Beverly squeezed his hand in silent support, while Charles quickly made notes on his tablet. Outside, the rain was beginning to diminish, and a ray of sunshine was trying to break through the gray clouds of New York. St. Francis Hospital was a completely different world from the luxurious environment Richard was accustomed to. The busy corridors, the smell of disinfectant, the peeling walls, everything there spoke of a reality he had always preferred to ignore. Mary was in a semi-private room, sharing the space with another patient. When Richard and Beverly entered, Helen was helping her mother sit up in bed, adjusting the pillows with a care that revealed years of dedication. "You came," Mary smiled, her tired eyes lighting up. "And you brought your wife. Welcome, Mrs. Montgomery." Beverly, normally so confident at social events, seemed out of place. "Please call me Beverly," she said softly, approaching the bed. "I brought something to show you," Richard said, taking from his pocket the photographs Charles had found. "They're from the old quarters." Helen took the photos with trembling hands. "My God, I remember this day," she whispered, showing the image to her mother. "It was my 5th birthday. Mr. August had brought a huge cake from the most famous bakery in the city." Mary touched the photograph with delicate fingers, as if she feared the image might disintegrate. "Your father was a complex man, Richard, divided between what he wanted to be and what was expected of him." "Why did you never try to contact us before?" Richard asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Why wait so long?" "Your father made me promise," Mary answered, her voice weak but firm. "He said if I kept our secret, he would ensure that Helen had a good education, that we would never want for anything. And he kept his word even after he was gone." Beverly, who had been observing the scene in silence, finally spoke. "The monthly transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands, they were for you?" Richard looked at his wife in surprise. "You knew about those transfers?" "I always knew," Beverly admitted. "But I learned a long time ago that some questions shouldn't be asked in families like ours." Helen, who had been leafing through the other photographs, stopped at a particular image. "Look at this," she said, extending the photo. It was an image of the old garden of the quarters, where several children were playing. Among them, a boy of about 12 smiled at the camera. "That's me," Richard recognized, astonished. "I used to escape from the mansion to play with the children. From the quarters, my mother would be furious when she found out." "You were a good boy," Mary smiled. "Unlike the other children from the mansion, you never treated us like servants. I think deep down, you always knew there was something special, connecting our families." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Long-buried memories began to emerge, afternoons playing in the quarters, Mary offering him freshly baked cookies, a small girl who followed him everywhere, calling him Uncle Rich. "The family festival is coming," he said abruptly. "In 2 weeks, I'll have to present the family ring before all of New York society." Mary and Helen exchanged a significant look. "And what do you intend to do?" Helen asked. "The truth is, I don't know," Richard admitted. "My whole life has been built on the reputation of the Montgomery family. If I reveal the truth about the ring, about you—" "You're afraid of losing everything," Mary completed softly. "Exactly like your father." Beverly, who had been observing the interaction in silence, stepped forward. "Perhaps," she said, "it's time to redefine what everything means." At that moment, a nurse entered the room announcing that visiting hours were ending. As they prepared to leave, Mary held Richard's hand. "Your father carried the weight of his choices until the end," she said. "But you, my dear, still have the chance to choose a different path." The week that followed the hospital visit was a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for Richard. Charles had located several former employees from the quarters, and the stories that emerged painted a very different picture of his father than the one he knew. In his office on the top floor of the Montgomery building, Richard examined the reports brought by his assistant. Mrs. Cecilia, the former cook, now ran a small restaurant in Brooklyn. The gardener, Mr. Joseph, had managed to open a flower shop that supported his entire family. All of them had received mysterious financial help to restart their lives after the fire. "Your father never really abandoned them," Charles commented, organizing more documents on the desk. "He created a secret fund to help all the staff from the quarters." Richard twisted the ring on his finger, a habit that now carried a new meaning. "And my mother never knew?" "Apparently not. The money came from personal accounts he kept separate from the family business." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Beverly, accompanied by Helen. In the last few weeks, to everyone's surprise, the two women had developed an unlikely friendship. "We brought something you need to see," Beverly announced, placing an old box on the desk. Helen found this among Mary's things. The box, made of dark wood and carved with delicate details, contained dozens of letters, all handwritten by August Montgomery. Along with them were photographs, bank deposit receipts, and a diary. "Dad documented everything," Helen explained, sitting beside her half-brother. "Every decision, every plan to protect us, every time he had to choose between his heart and his duty to the Montgomery family." Richard opened the diary with reverent care. His father's elegant handwriting filled page after page with confessions, regrets, and dreams never realized. "Today I saw Helen at school," Richard read aloud. "She won an essay prize. I wanted so badly to go up on stage and hug her. Tell everyone that this brilliant girl is my daughter. But all I could do was applaud discreetly from the back of the auditorium." Beverly placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, offering silent support. Charles, sensing the intensity of the moment, began to discreetly withdraw. "Stay, Charles," Richard asked. You're practically family now. I need all of you to help me make a decision." Helen took an elegant invitation from her bag. "The family festival starts in a week. The press is already announcing your presentation of the ring as one of the most anticipated moments. New York society expects to see the Montgomery heir reaffirming the power and tradition of the family," Beverly added. "But what tradition is that, Richard? Based on what values?" Richard stood up and walked to the window. Below, New York stretched out infinitely, a city built by families like his, on stories not always told. "Do you remember the last time my father presented the ring at the festival?" he asked, still looking at the city. "How could I forget?" Beverly replied. "It was his last public event before he passed. He seemed different that day." "He was tired," Helen said softly. "Mom told me he visited her the night before, said he couldn't stand living divided anymore, that he planned to tell the whole truth." Richard turned to face the group. "And now, here I am, about to go up on the same stage, carrying the same secrets." Charles, who had been leafing through some documents, abruptly raised his head. "Sir, I found something interesting in the festival records. The ring ceremony isn't just a tradition, it's a legal contract. Whoever presents the ring is legally reaffirming their position as the family's sole legitimate heir." "So that's it," Helen murmured. "That's why Dad could never publicly acknowledge me. The moment he did, the entire inheritance would be legally questioned. And that's why," Beverly completed, "your mother had so much power over him. She knew that if the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a social scandal. It would be the financial ruin of the family." Richard sat back down, picking up his father's diary. "I built an empire," he read, "but at what cost? I have 2 wonderful children who can never call each other siblings. I have all the money in the world, but I can't use it to give the woman I love the place she deserves. What kind of legacy is this that I'm leaving?" Helen approached her brother, gently touching the ring on his hand. "I don't need the money, Richard, I never did, but it would be nice to be able to tell the world who I really am." "The festival starts in a week," Charles gently reminded. "You'll need to make a decision, sir." Richard looked at each face in the room. Beverly, his companion of 2 decades, who now showed a strength he had never noticed before. Helen, the sister he should have known and loved since childhood. And Charles, the faithful assistant who had become an indispensable confidant. "Perhaps," he said finally, "it's time to create our own traditions." The preparations for the Festival of Traditional Families were taking over the city. Elegant banners decorated the streets of the historic center, and the old mansions of the Upper East Side were undergoing meticulous renovations. The social press talked of nothing else. This year promised to be an especially memorable celebration. In the hospital, Mary looked out the window at the first signs of the festivities beginning to color the city. Helen had decorated the room with fresh flowers, and a small TV broadcast reports about the event preparations. "Mr. Richard Montgomery," announced the reporter, "will present the legendary Montgomery ring, a tradition that goes back 5 generations. Experts estimate that the jewel, beyond its priceless historical value, is worth more than $5 million. Mary smiled sadly, touching her own ring hidden on a chain under her hospital gown. The intertwined serpents seemed to smile under the sunlight coming through the window. The door to the room opened, revealing Richard and Beverly. In recent weeks, their visits had become more frequent, always bringing stories, old photographs, and most importantly, a genuine desire for reconnection. "We brought a surprise," Beverly announced, carrying an elegant box. "It's a dress for the festival." Mary frowned, confused. "A dress, but I'm not going—" "Yes, you are," Richard gently interrupted her. "We've already spoken with your doctors. With the appropriate care, you'll be able to attend the ring ceremony." Helen, who had just entered the room bringing coffee for everyone, stopped in surprise. "But Richard, are you sure? People will talk. If they see Mum there." "Let them talk," he responded with surprising firmness. "I've spent too much time worrying about what people will say." Beverly opened the box, revealing a midnight blue silk dress, elegant but comfortable. "And that's not all," she continued, taking out a golden envelope. "Here's your official invitation, Mary. Not for the general area, but for the Montgomery family box. Mary took the invitation with trembling hands. There it was, printed in elegant letters, Mary Silver Montgomery. It was the first time she saw her full name, the name that August had promised to give her so many years ago, written on an official document. But how? She whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, taking Mary's hand between his. I've spent the last few weeks talking with lawyers, consultants, board members. It wasn't easy and some weren't happy, but he's changing everything, Mom, Helen completed, her voice choked with emotion. The company structure, the will, the family documents. I can't change the past, Richard continued. I can't undo the choices my father was forced to make, but I can choose a different path for the future. Beverly approached, sitting on the other side of the bed. The ring ceremony has always been about legitimacy, about proving who has the right to carry the Montgomery name. Well, it's time we redefined what that means. Mary looked at the dress, at the invitation, and finally at the ring she had carried hidden for so many years. August always said that one day the truth would come out, that one day our families would be one. And that day has come, Richard affirmed. But first I need to know, are you ready for this, Mary? Ready to face the stares, the comments, all of New York society? A serene smile illuminated Mary's tired face. My dear, I've spent 30 years carrying this secret with pride and dignity. Some people may not be ready for the truth, but I was born ready. Helen hugged her mother while Beverly discreetly wiped away a tear. Richard observed the scene, feeling for the first time in his life that he was truly honoring his father's legacy, not the legacy of appearances and empty traditions, but the legacy of love that August had hidden for so long in his heart. Then, it's decided, he said, standing up. In a week, the Montgomery family will rewrite its own history. The eve of the Festival of Traditional Families brought unusual agitation to the Montgomery penthouse. Regina, the family matriarch and Richard's mother, had arrived from her home in Paris as soon as she heard rumors about big changes in the ring presentation. What do you think you're doing, Richard? She demanded, her Louboutin heels echoing on the marble of the entrance hall. The company board called me. They say you've been asking questions about the fire in the quarters, about the former staff. Richard observed his mother with a calmness he had never felt before in her presence. Regina Montgomery was still an impressive woman at 70, every hair perfectly dyed and arranged, every gesture studied to maximize her natural authority. Sit down, Mother, he said softly. We have a lot to talk about. I don't have time for conversations, she cut him off. I came here to stop you from destroying everything your family has built. The festival starts tomorrow, and you will do exactly what all generations before you have done, present the ring, reaffirm our position in society, and keep our legacy intact. Beverly entered the room at that moment, carrying a tea tray. Regina, what a pleasant surprise, she said with a cordiality that didn't reach her eyes. Join us for tea. We have cookies from that French bakery you love. Regina shot an icy look at her daughter-in-law. You knew about all this, didn't you? And instead of stopping him, you're encouraging this madness. It's not madness, Mother, Richard intervened, his voice firm. It's the truth. And it's high time it came to light. He walked to his desk and took out his father's diary. We found this, along with all the letters, all the records that Dad kept over the years. Regina visibly paled at the sight of the diary. Where did you get that? Mary kept everything, he answered simply, just as she kept the other ring. The name seemed to hit Regina like a slap. She faltered slightly, and Beverly quickly guided her to the nearest sofa. So, you know, Regina whispered, her mask of composure finally cracking. About her, about the girl. Helen, Richard corrected. My sister has a name, Mother, and tomorrow she and Mary will be in the family box during the ceremony. Regina rose in a rush. No, I won't allow it. Don't you understand what's at stake here? I understand perfectly, Richard responded, keeping calm. I understand that 30 years ago you threatened to destroy Dad's reputation if he acknowledged the woman he loved and the daughter he had with her. I understand that you preferred to see entire families lose everything in the fire rather than allow your husband to do the right thing. The right thing? Regina laughed bitterly. You think it's that simple? That it's just a matter of right and wrong? That ring, she pointed to Richard's hand, represents more than a family jewel. It's a contract, a promise made generations ago. The moment your father acknowledged another heir, we would lose everything. Not just money and status, but the very foundation on which this family was built. And what foundation is that, Regina? Beverly asked softly. Lies, secrets, lives destroyed in the name of tradition? Regina turned to her daughter-in-law with fury in her eyes, but before she could respond, the door opened. Charles entered, followed by Helen. Time seemed to freeze. Regina stared at the newcomer with a mixture of horror and fascination. Helen, for her part, stood erect, dignified, her eyes, so much like August's, fixed on the woman who had kept her existence a secret for so long. Mrs. Montgomery, Helen greeted politely. It's a pleasure to finally meet you officially. Regina brought her hand to her throat, an involuntary gesture of shock. You're identical to him. Yes, Helen simply agreed. People always said that when Dad came to see me in secret, at school, or when he appeared in disguise at my birthdays. Richard watched his mother falter again, all her aristocratic composure breaking down in the face of living proof of the love her husband had shared with another woman. Why now? Regina asked, her voice almost a whisper. Why after so many years? Because Mom is sick, Helen answered with simplicity. And because it's time to heal old wounds, don't you think? You must be tired of carrying this secret too. A heavy silence fell over the room. Charles discreetly served more tea while Beverly watched the scene with attentive eyes. Richard remained standing by the window, the ring on his hand catching the light of the setting sun. Regina slowly approached Helen, her eyes studying every detail of the woman's face. He loved you very much, she finally said. In his last years, August could barely look at the ring without crying. I pretended not to see, of course. As I pretended not to see so many things. Mother, Richard called softly, tomorrow during the festival, I'm going to tell the truth about the two rings. Not to cause a scandal or destroy the family name, but to do what Dad always wanted. Officially unite our families. You can fight against this. You can try to stop us, or you can, for the first time, choose to be on the right side of history. Regina turned to her son, and for the first time he saw something different in her eyes. Not the iron determination of always, but something softer, almost vulnerable. And if I say I'm already too tired to fight, the morning of the festival dawned with a surprisingly blue sky in New York. Central Park, the chosen location for the celebrations, was transformed. Elegant tents dotted the lawns, and an imposing stage had been set up near the lake where the traditional families would present their symbols and histories. At the hospital, a team of nurses helped Mary prepare. The midnight blue dress fit perfectly, and Helen had hired a hairdresser and makeup artist to ensure her mother would look impeccable for the occasion. Are you sure you want to do this, Mom? Helen asked for the 10th time, adjusting the silk shawl over her mother's shoulders. Mary smiled, touching the ring she now openly wore on a gold chain around her neck. I've never been so sure of anything in my life, daughter. In the Montgomery apartment, an equally significant transformation was taking place. Regina, after an entire night talking with Richard and Helen, had woken up different. Her hands trembled slightly as she helped Beverly organize the final details. Mary's dress, she said suddenly, is the same blue that August always said was his favorite. Beverly stopped what she was doing, surprised by the comment. Yes, Helen mentioned it was her father's favorite color. Regina nodded, lost in memories. He always bought blue flowers, you know. I thought they were to decorate the mansion, but now. She let the sentence die in the air. Charles hurriedly entered the apartment carrying several folders. Mr. Richard, the journalists are already positioned, and... He hesitated, looking nervously at Regina. Some board members are demanding an emergency meeting before the ceremony. Tell them we'll meet them in the box, Richard answered, adjusting his tie. It's time for everyone to know the true story of the Montgomery family. Central Park was packed when the family arrived. Photographers jostled to record the entrance of the businessman and his wife. but it was the whispers and surprised looks when Regina Montgomery appeared arm in arm with Helen that really drew attention. In the family box, the board members waited with tense expressions. The oldest of them, Albert Santos, who had worked with August Montgomery for decades, was the first to speak. "Richard, this madness can still be avoided," he said in a low voice. "Think about the company's stock value, the family's reputation." "Albert," Regina interrupted him, her voice surprisingly firm. "How long did you work with my husband?" 30, 40 years. The man looked at her, confused by the question. 42 years, Mrs. Montgomery. Then you must remember how he would look when he gazed out the office window toward the old staff quarters, how his eyes always searched for someone during company events. How he never, not once, managed to be truly happy with all the success he achieved. Albert lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable. The other board members exchanged uncertain looks. At that moment, a murmur ran through the box. Mary had arrived, accompanied by a discreet nurse. She walked slowly, supported by Helen, but there was a natural dignity in her movements that made everyone in the environment fall silent. "Mary," Regina approached, to everyone's surprise. "You're wearing the perfume that August always brought, back from his trips to Paris." Mary smiled softly. "He never forgot my favorite fragrance." The two women looked at each other for a long moment, the official wife and the woman August had truly loved. Decades of secrets, hurts, and regrets seemed to float between them. "Ladies and gentlemen," an announcer proclaimed over the loudspeakers, "in 15 minutes we will begin the traditional ceremony of family symbols." Richard looked at each person in the box, his mother finally letting the mask of perfection fall. Beverly, his companion, who had become much more than a wife of appearances. Helen, the sister he should have known from the beginning. Mary, the woman who carried her part of the Montgomery history with the silent dignity. And Charles, the assistant who had become the guardian of so many family secrets. "It's time," he said, touching the two rings in his pocket, his and the one Mary had entrusted to him for this moment. Regina approached her son, adjusting his tie in a maternal gesture she hadn't made in a long time. "You are much braver than your father and I ever were," she whispered. "He would be proud. I am proud." The auditorium set up in Central Park was full. The cream of New York society, businessmen, politicians, and the press occupied every available seat. On stage, representatives of traditional families presented their symbols one after another. Ancient jewels, historical documents, objects that told the story of New York's construction. In the Montgomery box, the air was charged with tension and expectation. Mary held Helen's hand, while Regina surprisingly remained beside them, as if her presence could somehow protect them from the curious looks that were already circulating around the venue. "And now," announced the Master of Ceremonies, "we come to the most anticipated moment of the night. To present the legendary Montgomery ring, we welcome Mr. Richard Montgomery, current president of the business group and guardian of the legacy of one of New York's most traditional families." Richard stood up, adjusting his jacket. Beverly squeezed his hand one last time, whispering, "We're all with you." The path to the stage seemed longer than normal. Each step echoed in the respectful silence that had settled in the auditorium. In the front row, Richard could see the anxious faces of the board members. In the following rows, other traditional families waited with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Rumors about changes in the Montgomery presentation had spread quickly. Upon reaching the microphone, Richard took a deep breath. The spotlight illuminated him, and cameras transmitted every moment live to screens scattered throughout the park, where thousands of people followed the event. "Good evening," he began, his voice firm. "For generations, the Montgomery family has presented itself on this stage to show our most precious symbol, this ring." He raised his right hand, allowing the lights to make the intertwined serpents shine. A murmur of admiration ran through the audience. The Montgomery ring was famous not only for its material value, but for what it represented: power, tradition, continuity. For the past 30 years, I have stood on this stage repeatedly to tell the same story: how this ring represents the strength and integrity of the Montgomery family, how it symbolizes our dedication to the traditions and values that built this city. Richard paused, his eyes finding Helen's in the box. But today, for the first time, I will tell the true story of this ring, a story of love, of sacrifice, and of choices, some right, many wrong. The murmuring in the audience increased. In the box, Regina held Mary's hand, a gesture that surprised them both. My father, August Montgomery, was a man divided between duty and heart. 30 years ago, he had not one, but two identical rings made. Richard took from his pocket the second ring, the one Mary had kept for so many years. One for the family everyone knew and another for the family he was forced to keep in the shadows. The silence in the auditorium was absolute now. In the front rows, some board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. At that time, love between people of different social classes was considered a scandal. A traditional family like ours could not admit that its patriarch had fallen, in love with an employee, that he had a daughter outside of marriage. And so, in the name of tradition, lives were divided, hearts were broken, and a part of the Montgomery family was forced to live in the shadows. Richard raised the two rings, one in each hand. Under the stage lights, it was impossible to distinguish which was which. Both shone with the same intensity, told the same story. But today I am not just here to tell a story from the past. I am here to correct an error that has lasted far too long. He turned to the family box. Helen, Mary, would you please join me on stage? The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath as Helen helped Mary stand. Regina, in a gesture no one expected, offered her arm to support her former rival as they descended to the stage. New York, Richard continued, his voice now choked with emotion. Allow me to introduce Mary Silver Montgomery, my father's great love, and Helen Montgomery, my sister. From today on, there are no longer two Montgomery families. We are one, united not just by blood, but by love and truth. On stage, under the lights and before all of New York society, Richard handed one of the rings to Helen. The intertwined serpents shone in their hands, no longer as symbols of division, but as a link that finally united what should never have been separated. The months that followed the Festival of Traditional Families brought profound changes, not just for the Montgomerys, but for all of New York society. The story of the two rings became a symbol of transformation, inspiring other traditional families to reveal their own secrets and acknowledge long-denied ties. Mary, although still requiring medical care, had been transferred to a special suite in the city's best hospital. Her room, always full of blue flowers, became a meeting point where the newly unified family spent hours sharing stories, recovering lost time. "Did you know I found more of Dad's letters?" Helen commented one afternoon, sitting beside her mother. "He kept copies of all of them in the company office. Charles discovered them in a secret folder." Regina, who now visited Mary regularly, smiled sadly. August was always a meticulous archivist. I think deep down, he hoped that someday someone would find everything and complete the puzzle. Richard, observing the interaction between his mother and his new family, felt a peace he had never experienced before. The company had not just survived the revelation, it had grown. The transparency and courage to face the past had brought a new respect to the Montgomery name. Beverly had dedicated herself to a special project, the transformation of the former staff quarters into a cultural and educational center. The location, which for so long carried the mark of a tragedy, would now become a space of memory and reconciliation. "The Mary Montgomery Cultural Center," she announced during a family meeting, "will be a place where the stories of all the families who built New York, not just the traditional ones, can be told and celebrated." Mary, moved, squeezed her daughter-in-law's hand. "I never imagined my name would be on something like this." "Your name should have been on many things, Mary," Regina admitted softly. "Forgive me for taking so long to understand that." Charles, who had become much more than an assistant, entered the room carrying an old box. "I found something else you need to see," he announced, taking out a photo album. The images told a parallel story of the Montgomery family. August in stolen moments with Helen and Mary, discreet celebrations, small gestures of love recorded in secret. In one of the photos, he held the two rings against the light, and his expression was one of deep sadness. "He never stopped loving you," Regina said, surprising everyone. "And I never stopped knowing that. Perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Not understanding that the heart has enough room to love in different ways." Richard took the two rings, one he still wore, another that now officially belonged to Helen, and placed them side by side on the table next to Mary's bed. The intertwined serpents seemed to smile under the sunlight coming through the window. "You know what's most amazing?" Helen commented, taking her ring. "It's not the value of the jewel, nor even its historical significance. It's how something that was created to hide a secret ended up becoming the instrument to reveal the truth. And that truth," Richard completed, "has made us stronger than any tradition could." Mary watched her children with eyes shining with pride and love. Her silent struggle of 30 years had finally ended, not in tragedy as she had so feared, but in redemption and unity. The late New York afternoon sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. In the hospital room, the Montgomery family, now complete and true, continued sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. The two rings shone side by side, no longer as symbols of division, but as silent witnesses that love, when true, always finds its way to the light.